Hi everyone, you're welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Amaka. In this tutorial, we are going to be learning how to make a palazzo pant. We have different tutorials on how to make different types of pants. I'm going to leave the link of those videos in the description box below so that you can check them out later. If you're yet to subscribe to this channel, please click on the subscribe button and also turn on the notification bell so that you will be notified whenever I upload new videos. So let's get started. So this is the fabric I'll be using for this tutorial. My fabric is 3 yards. Now my fabric is folded into two. I'm going to start by drafting the front panel. Now I've drawn a starting point which is also going to serve as my waist point. Now on my waist point, I'm going to subtract 1.5 inches for my band. That's why I'm placing my tape this way. Now I have 1.5 inches here. So I'll place my tape this way and I'll take my measurement. So the hip point I'm working with is 8 inches. The crotch depth is 12 inches. But I'm going to add 1 extra inch to it. Because it's a free pant, I'm adding extra 1 inch to it. And that gives you 13 inches. So how do you get your crotch depth? You get your crotch depth by dividing your hip circumference by 4. Whatever it gives you, that's your crotch depth. So the full length of my pant is 42 inches. 42 inches, and I'm going to use 2 inches for hemming allowance. So I'm going to extend the points. So I'm extending the points. Now this is my waist point, my hip point, my crotch depth, and the full length of my pant, and I have 2 inches hemming allowance. So on the hip point, I'm going to mark the hip circumference divided by 4, which is 12 inches. I'm going to mark it on the crotch line, and I'll also mark it on the waist point. And I'll connect the points. So on the crotch line, I'm going to mark my crotch extension. Now I'm going to be using 2.5 inches for my crotch extension. So from here, I'm going to mark 2.5 inches. But if the person is on the small side, you can use 2 inches for the crotch extension. But I'm using 2.5 inches. So I'm going to connect this point to this point. So the next thing I'm going to do is to take my waist measurement. My waist circumference divided by 4 gives you 8.5 inches. Now I'm taking my measurement from here, not from here. So I'm going to mark 8.5 inches here, plus 1 inch for that, and 1 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to connect this point to this point. So now I'm going to check what I have here. Now the measurement I have here, I'm going to bring it down to the hem. And I'll add 1 inch seam allowance. I'm also adding 1 inch seam allowance here. And I'll connect the points. So I'll add half inch seam allowance on the waist point. Half inch, which I'm going to use to join the band to the pant. So I'll cut it. So now I'm going to split this. I'm going to split it into two. So I'm going to place my dart. Now for me to do that, I'm going to find the midpoint of the waistline. Now this is the midpoint. Now the front dart is 5 inches. So I'm going to mark ½ inch on both sides of this line. And I'll connect it to this point. So this is my dart. Sorry guys, I didn't know this thing went out of the camera. So this is what I did. On this line, I marked ½ inch on both sides of this line and connected it to this point. I marked ½ inch here and ½ inch here and connected it to this line. So that's it with the front panel. So for the back panel, I've placed the front panel on another fabric which is going to serve as the back panel, and this fabric is folded into two. I folded my fabric into two. Now for the back panel, on the waist, I'm going to mark 2.5 inches here, and I'll mark 2.5 inches here. While here on the crotch extension, I'm going to mark 3 inches. On the hem, I'll mark 2.5 inches. So I'm going to connect the points. Now here, on this point, I'm going to go up by 1.5 inches. Now I'm going to check what I have on the front waistline. Now what I have here is 10 3/4. Now this 10 3/4, I'm going to mark it here slantly. So I'm going to mark 10 3/4 here, just like this, and I'll connect the points slantly. So I'm going to connect this point to the hip. So now this is my hip point. This is my hip point. So I'm going to connect this point to the hip, just like this. For the back dart, I'm going to find the midpoint of this line. So this is the midpoint of this line. Now from this midpoint, I'm going to come down by 5 inches. I'll mark 5 inches from here, and I'll connect the points. Now I'm going to mark ½ inch on both sides of this line. So I'll mark ½ inch here and ½ inch here, and I'll connect it to this point. And I'll cut it. So I'm going to split it. So I'm going to take this to my sewing machine and I'm going to start by closing the dart. Now after closing the dart, I'm going to sew the crotch. I'll sew the crotch with 1/2 inch seam allowance. And I'm also sewing here. Now this is the front crotch and this is the back crotch. I'm also sewing the back crotch with 1/2 inch seam allowance and I'll sew the dart. So this is the front panel. Now I've closed my dart and I've also closed the crotch. So let me show you how to eliminate that bulge. So from the waist, I'm going to come down by 1 inch and I'll connect it to the dart part. Now this is to eliminate the bulge, that bulge we usually have on our pants. So from here I'm going to come down by 1 inch and I'll mark 1 inch and I'll connect it to this point. Now I had to close the dart to do this so that it won't affect the dart. So now this is what I'm going to do. So now I've reduced the front. So that bulge we usually have here is not going to be there. I've eliminated it. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to place the front panel on the back panel, right side facing right side, and I'll sew. So I'll place it right side facing right side and I'll take it to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew. So I'm going to sew the side with 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'll sew it down to the hem and I'll also sew the other side. Now this other side, I'm going to fix the zipper. I'll sew from the hip point. I'll sew it down and leave the part where I'm going to fix the zipper. I'll leave the part where I'm going to fix the zipper, then I'll sew the other side down. So I'm going to sew from here down to the hem with 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then I'll fix the zipper here. This side is going to be open and I'm going to fix the zipper here. So I'm going to do it and show you the outcome. So now after sewing, now this is what I have. I've sewn here with 1/2 inch seam allowance down and I've also sewn here and I've also fixed the zipper. So this is my zipper. I've fixed my zipper. So the next thing I'm going to do is to sew the crotch. So I'll take this to my sewing machine and I'm going to hold it this way and I'll sew from here down to the hem and I'll sew here down to the hem. So this is the band. Now what I have here is the waist circumference plus extra 3 inches. Now 1 inch is going to be for seam allowance, which I'm going to use to sew the both sides, and 2 inches will be for overlap. So now I'm going to turn this way and I'll sew with 1/2 inch seam allowance. So after sewing this way, now I'm going to place the band on the pant and I'll sew. See what I'm doing? You see that I still have my excess. The part that is going to serve as the overlap, I still have it here. So I'm going to sew the waist with 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to sew it to this point. I'm also going to sew this part with 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to do all these things I just said and show you the outcome. So after sewing, now this is what I have. So I've fixed this part. So I'm going to fold it this way and I'll push in the seam allowance and I'll top stitch. Now I'm going to top stitch. I have 1/2 inch seam allowance here. I'm going to fold in the half inch seam allowance and I'll top stitch. So I'm going to sew from here. I'll sew it round and stop at this point. So here, I've also sewn the seam allowance. Now you see how it is. So I'm going to turn it. Now I'm going to sew the seam allowance. I have 1/2 inch seam allowance here and I'll sew. So I'm going to sew it round to this point. I'll sew it round to this point. Now you see that I have my overlap I have my overlap. So now the next thing I'm going to do is this. So after sewing this, I'm going to fix my hook and eye. So this is it. Now I'm done with the band. So the next thing I'm going to do is to give this a thorough press, and I'm going to wear it on my mannequin and show you what it looks like. If you found this tutorial helpful, please click on the like button. Share this video with your friends. Share this video in your sewing groups. Subscribe to my channel if you've not done so. Feel free to ask questions. I'll be in the comment section to answer all your questions. We've come to the end of this tutorial. Thanks for watching. See you in my next video.